Hello everybody, welcome back to Apple Gaming SE. This is Apple News and Opinion for April 14th through April 20th, 2024. New subscribers this week. I have received 2 new subscribers, so I'm back up to 190 after several weeks of being below that number, so I am quite happy to be back where I was. As unfortunately, YouTube has only told me who one of the new subscribers is. That's FlipnTuckProductions. So I appreciate you, FlipnTuck, or FlipnTuck. I'm sorry, I totally got your name wrong there. FlipnTuckProductions. So I totally appreciate you subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we will see you in the future and we can interact a little bit more. Starting off with the news, we are going to focus on games all on the iPhone. So it has been a huge week for emulators in terms of their releases and for just news about them. So first story is from 9to5Mac. Riley Testut launches the Delta Game Emulator on the App Store for everyone and the AltStore marketplace for the EU. So the Delta emulator is officially on the App Store. For those who missed it, I did a stream yesterday playing Star Wars Rogue Squadron for the N64. It played wonderfully through the entire stream. It was just a little under 2 hours long. It reminded me of all of the same loves and hates that I had for Rogue Squadron on the N64 over 20 years ago, including the terrible aim of your X-Wing and the frame drops when things are just a little too hectic on screen, namely around water effects. I really can't wait to get involved with some of the other games. I found the ROMs that I have for my original dumps of the Shadows of the Empire and Star Fox 64. The emulator does tons of older games too, such as the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy Color. So I've not entirely ruled out playing some of the other games as well here on the channel if I can find my cartridges to do the ROM dumps for them. I admit I do not typically back up my Game Boy games ROMs to my PC, so we'll have to see if I can find the cartridges and if they're still usable. All of that aside, emulation gaming looks bright for the iPhone and the iPad. I played Rogue Squadron on both my iPhone 15 Pro and my iPad 8. It plays perfect on both systems. There's only one thing I could wish for. It would be to add in some kind of features for things like on Dolphin or PPSP, where you can improve the actual resolution output, so you can scale the resolution to 2 or 3 or 4x. I think that would help the N64 games like Rogue Squadron quite a lot. For other news, the Provenance emulator is looking to come to the App Store for PlayStation emulation, and there are 2 sources for this, 9to5Mac and Apple Insider. To start out, I will just quote 9to5Mac's one of their paragraphs. Quote, "For those unfamiliar, Provenance is a game emulator already available through the AltStore and through other side-loading methods. Similar to Riley Testut's Delta, which is now available on the App Store, Provenance can also emulate most of Nintendo's classic consoles, such as the NES, SNES, Game Boy, N64, and DS. However, it also works with Atari, Sega, and PlayStation games." End quote. So maybe Provenance will give me my high-res N64 dreams, or at least high resolution, not necessarily high like textures, not high-quality textures, but hopefully they'll bring that high-resolution world to the iPhone and the iPad. It looks like it's a little more feature-rich than the Delta emulator, and we might have some resolution scaling options in the future. There's quite a lot of desktop emulators that already have that, so here is hoping. I simply did not have a PlayStation back in the day, so I don't know how many non-Nintendo games I'll be playing on Provenance. My first PlayStation console was the PS4. I was mostly a Nintendo, Xbox, and PC guy for the majority of my life, so I doubt I'll be doing any kind of PlayStation or Sega emulation with Provenance, as I don't have any games from that era. So without having a physical copy, I don't feel it is we shall say, morally or ethically correct to create backups. If you acquire the ROMs for something that you do not have a physical copy of, I think that there is an ethical question as to whether or not that is, we'll say, a good, we'll say an ethical good in society. So it's not, I don't know if it really counts as piracy or stealing. I'm not sure I'd go that far, but if you don't have a physical copy, then I don't know that you can say you have the right to a digital copy underneath something like the DMCA. So that's just 2 cents on that. It's really short, and that's a much bigger conversation. Emulation has a lot of gray areas. Anyway, so next story, also from 9to5Mac, the DolphiniOS emulator explains why GameCube and Wii emulation won't be in the App Store. And unfortunately, not all emulators are going to be on the App Store due to various restrictions that Apple has put in place. In this case, it looks like DolphiniOS uses something called JIT, which is a just-in-time compiler, which translates PowerPC code to ARM code. Thank you, dog, for ruining my audio just now. This is required because both the GameCube and the Wii have both used PowerPC processors from IBM. Apple has already denied the request to use JIT once, so we hope that Dolphin for iOS will be able to find an alternate solution. The Bimmy NES Emulator is the last game emulation app for iPhone, iPad, and Mac, or is the latest, I'm sorry. But the unfortunate update is that the developer decided to pull the emulator. And there's still a lot of hurdles just generally to overcome with emulators on the App Store. The developer for Bimmy NES, who was focusing on the original Nintendo, has pulled the app out of fear, was his quote. I haven't been able to find any other meaningful information as to what the developer was afraid of. Some people are speculating it is because he used the term NES for his emulator, which is an acronym for the Nintendo Entertainment System, which is copyrighted. So that may be the issue, but there's no hard data I can find on why exactly, what exactly he is fearful of. Apple did remove its first Game Boy emulator from the App Store, and this is also from 9to5Mac, and of course Apple's direct enforcement can cause emulators just not to get published or to be revoked after the fact. In this case, it sounds like it's justified, as this particular emulator looked to be a copyright infringement of Riley Testut's own GBA for iOS emulator. Despite this, I agree with 9to5Mac and Apple's decision that the future of emulation I agree with 9to5Mac's view that future emulation on the iPhone is looking great, and I agree with Apple removing this particular product. I don't believe GBA for iOS was an open source emulator, so it would have been a copyright infringement, and Apple was legally and ethically correct to remove that emulator. Now we're going to get political. So Elizabeth Warren is talking about green text messages, and her quote is that Apple is ruining relationships. This is coming from 9to5Mac. So Senator Warren really is not one of my favorite senators, and this tweet only confirms why I continue to dislike her. She's missing the point entirely. The issue is not whether or not people feel ostracized for having green bubbles in group text because it is sticky, ugly Android. Ew. No, that's not it. Android has a lot of great features and components to it, and there's a lot of wonderful hardware and unique hardware to the Android ecosystem. One lawyer arguing against Warren's position and the Department of Justice lawsuit said that Apple is basically being ostracized because some people find the iPhone to be cool. And that is certainly one take on it. The less generous side is that the Department of Justice position and Senator Warren's position, and that people are being excluded from social events. I again feel I need to reiterate for my position on this personally. My issue with anything that is not iMessage or Signal or some other kind of end-to-end encrypted messenger is that privacy laws for the United States do not exist if you transmit your information in the clear. So everything from unencrypted SMS text messages to unencrypted email are not generally considered to be covered under right to privacy laws, and there are some special considerations where that's not the case, just so that we're clear. And until proper end-to-end encryption is enabled by default for all text messaging systems on every phone, I will continue to harp on the fact that the standard texting that is on Android is lacking. RCS is great, and for Google and Samsung that support RCS, that is also great. But it is not the universal truth across all Android systems. Many different manufacturers do not, by default, have Google's Messenger installed, which has RCS enabled. So the green bubble is really only there to let you and I know, or in this case, it would be for me, if I'm talking about myself here, it's there so that I know that if I'm texting somebody with a green bubble, it is immediately and obviously clear the person I'm texting with does not have encryption, and they do not support all of the rich texting features that iMessage does. I know that Apple uses iMessage as a lock-in system, and that's not up for debate. I'm not arguing against it. What I'm telling you is that for me personally, Apple's mechanisms of lock-in, it is irrelevant for my personal usage and consideration. I like the features they provide. I'm not locked in if I'm the one walking in the door and closing it behind me and then locking it myself. So, just saying. I think it's a matter of perspective as far as that goes. Our next story is Apple is accepting political ads without complying with the law, according to a research done by Mozilla and some other organizations. This is coming from 9to5Mac. This is predominantly focusing on some findings or some research they did in the European Union. And this article is actually less inflammatory than I expected it to be. Apple is still missing the boat when it comes to getting a perfect score, but it appears it's doing much better than places like Twitter or Bing or Snapchat and quite a number of others. Apple found itself in a relatively similar position to LinkedIn and TikTok, but only by comparison, according to Mozilla. The scores to say that for these particular trio of companies, the data for finding who is funding their ads is available, but it is not readily accessible. So it requires some sleuthing on your part if you want to figure out who Apple is partnering with for these ads. Given that we are, in my opinion, effectively in the second Cold War, Apple needs to do better with showing the transparency of who is and is not paying them for ad space. Tim Cook has had a diplomatic voyage these last week or so as he's been going around Asia, and he made a comment regarding manufacturing in Indonesia. This is coming from 9to5Mac. The thrust of this conversation here is that Apple has been previously allowed to meet Indonesia's requirement of local economic investments through their Developer Academy program. The president of India pressed Tim Cook this week, and Tim Cook said that it is something Apple will look into as to whether or not they will bring manufacturing to Indonesia. Indonesia is the fourth most populous country in the world, and so it is not entirely out of the question that Apple would seek to make a new manufacturing hub within the country for local sales. But it also has the advantage of continuing to diversify manufacturing away from China. The Apple Singapore campus is getting 2 more buildings for AI work. This is coming from 9to5Mac. Lastly, for the geopolitics section, Apple is going to invest $250 million in Singapore to bring to new AI-focused research campuses into the country. It is pretty well known, at least it's heavily rumored, that iOS is going to focus on major improvements to Siri, and Singapore is going to be vital to the future development. It is highly unlikely the expansion of these 2 campuses are going to be ready by the time iOS 18 releases, but for anything beyond, they will likely be a major contributing factor. So think of later iOS 18 releases, like the 18-point releases, and certainly iOS 19. So we're going to finish up today with the rumor mill. So the rumor is that Apple ends production on FineWoven cases and watch bands following complaints. Again, coming from 9to5Mac. And it looks like the FineWoven cases, as nice as they are and as great as they feel, are just not doing well with customers. There's too many complaints and supposedly too many returns of these products. Or presumably, I should say. We don't really have the data on that. And Apple has a pretty strict return policy, but if the complaints are significant enough and egregious enough, Apple will sometimes allow for the returns and refunds or replacements with a similar product. If I had to guess, I would say that there are a ton of silicone cases out there that have been given to customers for customer satisfaction after their FineWoven cases have not looked very good. After a few months and the case really starts to show its wear, it's probably going to get some silicone cases to keep customers happy. Since the FineWoven cases have come out and all the Apple stores I've been to look at them, it's plain to see how bad and scratched up they look on the shelves. It definitely does not endear you to want to buy the FineWoven products. And that is news and opinions for this week. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have not already, please like and subscribe to the channel. We will continue streaming next Friday and next Saturday. We're doing Fantasian Fridays, and we're doing Star Wars Saturday. So looking forward to that, and we will have our next news video next Sunday. So take care, everybody. I hope you have a great week. Bye-bye.